Hello, this is Mr. Huber. In this lesson, we're going to look at parallel and perpendicular linear equations. Let's first talk about parallel lines. Okay, parallel lines will have slopes that are equal to each other. They would look something like this if we graph them. Maybe we have a line like this, like this. They never intersect. They're always the same distance apart. They always have the same slope, so they have the same rise over run. The same rise over run. If they rise and run at the same rate, they'll never get closer to one another, never intersect, always be that same distance apart. Okay, so they have slopes that are identical, equal to each other. When we talk about perpendicular lines, okay, perpendicular lines have slopes that are negative reciprocals. Negative reciprocals means they're going to have opposite signs, one positive, one negative, and they're going to be reciprocals of one another. If you're ever unsure if you are dealing with negative reciprocals, the product of negative reciprocals is always going to be a -1. Equal slopes are pretty easy to identify. Perpendicular lines can be a little more difficult. If we talk about negative reciprocals, let's see a couple examples here. So if we have a slope of 2 over 3, right here, 2 over 3, that would be perpendicular to the slope -3 over 2. 2 over 3, -3 over 2. They're opposite signs, one positive, one negative, and they're reciprocals. 2 over 3 reciprocal, you flip it over as 3 over 2. Or if we talk about their products being -1, if we multiplied 2 over 3 times -3 over 2, right, product means multiplying, those are reduced to 1 and 1. The 2's are reduced to 1 and 1. And we'd multiply and get 1, and we have a positive times a negative, we'd get -1 if we multiply those two slopes together. Then we see the slope -5. Okay, if we talk about the slope -5, it's important to remember what that would be as a fraction. -5 as a fraction would be -5 over 1. So when we write the reciprocal, it would be 1 over 5, and then we have to change the sign. So -5, reciprocal, and opposite sign, positive 1 over 5. Okay, so keep in mind how we can identify parallel and perpendicular slopes. We're going to see how we can use them now to write some equations. Okay? If we want to write an equation of lines that are parallel or perpendicular to each other, all right, we want to write first an equation of a line that passes through the point -211 and is parallel to y equals -2x plus 1. So if we're being told that it's parallel to the line y equals -2x plus 1, that means it has a slope of -2. Now this is just like we've seen previously where we have a slope and a point. All right, we have the slope -2, we have the point -2 comma 11, and we could write the equation of the line. A couple ways we could go about that, right? We could use point slope form. We do y minus 11 equals -2 times x plus 2. And then we could distribute the -2 and get -2x minus 4. We add 11 to both sides and we get y equals -2x plus 7. That would be the equation of that line in a couple different forms. We would have point slope form right here. We would have slope intercept form right here. Okay? Another way we could get that slope intercept form is to start with y equals mx plus b. And if we don't know the b, we can plug in values for y, m, and x. So we have those. We have a y value, 11, equals m times x plus b. And we could solve for the b value. So we would get 11 equals 4 plus b. And when we subtract 4 on both sides, we get 7 equals b. So now we would have the y-intercept and the slope. We could write out y equals mx plus b equation, which would be y equals -2x plus 7, which is the same as what we had right here. Same equation, a couple different ways to get to it. Again, depending on what you're trying to do with the information in the equation or what you're being asked to write. If you're just being asked to write point slope form, then you're good right here. This is point slope form. If you're being asked to write slope intercept, you can start with point slope and simplify it to y equals mx plus b. Or you could use y equals mx plus b, and if you don't know the y-intercept, you can solve for it using the point and the slope. Plug those in for your y, your m, and your x. Again, from your y here, your x is here, and your slope of -2 we got because it's parallel to this line. So some different ways you can go about writing those equations. Be comfortable with them. They can be useful for different reasons. Okay? So let's talk about writing the equation of a line that's perpendicular to another line. And we talk about perpendicular lines, and we talk about them having slopes that are opposite reciprocals. Right? If we have a positive slope, it would look something like this. And if we want to draw a line perpendicular to it, right, meeting at a right angle here, we would have to know this has a slope that's positive. This would have a slope that's negative, right? They're different signs, one positive, one negative, and then the reciprocal part. But keep in mind what perpendicular lines might look like. That could help make sure you're getting information that makes sense. Okay? So if we look at this equation, and we want to write a line perpendicular to y equals 4x minus 7. If it's perpendicular to this line, that means it's going to have a slope of negative 1/4. Remember, 4 is the same as 4 over 1. So reciprocal will be 1 over 4, and then we change the sign. And now we could write point slope form, let's say. So we'd have y minus 3 equals negative 1/4 x minus 8. Right? We use the point 8 comma 3, we use the slope negative 1/4, and we can write point slope form. And if we want to distribute the negative 1/4 into parentheses, we get y minus 3 equals negative 1/4 x, and then negative times negative would be a positive. 1/4 times 8 would be 8 over 4, which is 2. Right, keep in mind, we have 1/4 times 8 over 1, that would be 1 and 2. Right, that comes out to 2 over 1, which is where we get the y-intercept of 2 there, when we distribute the negative 1/4 into the parentheses. Okay. Well, it's not the y-intercept yet. We have to add 3 to both sides, but when we do add the 3 to both sides, then we'll get our y-intercept, and we'll have the final equation y equals negative 1/4 x plus 5. Keep in mind we can also start with a y equals mx plus b and write 3 equals negative 1/4 times 8 plus b. Right? Here we have a y equals mx plus b. Y, m, and x. There's our y. There's our m, negative 1/4, because again it's perpendicular to this line. And then there's our x, the 8. So y, m, and x. And now we could solve for the b. So if we multiply the negative 1/4 times 8, we get negative 2 plus b. We add the 2 to both sides, and we get 5 equals b. Now, if we're going to write the equation, we have to make sure we actually write the equation. Don't just solve for b and stop. We want to write y equals negative 1/4 x plus 5. Again, there's our equation for that line. A couple of different ways to get there. But keep in mind what perpendicular means. Okay, that perpendicular, right? Perpendicular here means that we're going to have a slope that's an opposite reciprocal. Okay? If we look at some trivia regarding unusual mammals. What mammal has knees that face backwards? This might be an animal that you don't normally think of as a mammal to begin with. It's a bat. And bats' knees face backward, the only mammal that's like that. It helps for the way it lands and hangs, and so it's very useful for it coming in particular, landing and having the knees bend backwards, where it can come in at high rates of speed, land effectively that way. All right, so now let's look at one more way we can write the equation of the line here. A little different situation because we're starting with an equation that we don't know the slope of, right? This is telling us to write an equation line perpendicular, keyword there, perpendicular to the line 2x plus 4y equals negative 12. We don't know the slope of this line yet, so we don't know what that perpendicular slope is going to be. So we need to solve for y. We need to get what the slope is. So I can subtract 2x on both sides, and I'll have 4y equals negative 2x minus 12. And then if I divide by 4 on both sides, I'll get y equals negative 2 over 4 x minus 3, which is y equals negative 1/2 x minus 3. Right, that 2/4 can reduce to 1/2. So now the perpendicular slope, okay, perpendicular slope is going to be m equals positive 2. We take the 1/2, reciprocal would be 2 over 1, and then we have a negative slope already, so we want the opposite of that, which would be a positive 2. So a slope of positive 2, we have a 0.6 comma negative 5. we could write the equation. A line y plus 5, y minus negative 5 equals m, which is 2, x minus 6. That's y plus 5 equals 2x minus 12, which is y equals 2x minus 17. Again, if we want to take y equals mx plus b form and work with that, we could take our y value of negative 5 equals 2 times x, which is 6, plus b. Negative 5 equals 12 plus b. Subtract the 12 on both sides and we get negative 17 equals b. So then we take our negative 17 for b, our 2 for the slope, and we could use those to write y equals 2x minus 17. Same equation for that line. Key is know the slope of the line, and then if you want to write an equation parallel to it, keep the slope the same. You want to write an equation perpendicular to it, you take the slope and make it an opposite reciprocal, and then remember how we can use points and slopes to write our equations of the lines.